All right, I'm going to begin, or the intro to this interview. I'll read suitably woke couple of paragraphs from a story from Radio New Zealand written by Sumya Bamdepati. He's a journalist about it, apparently. And I'll just read it. Advocates are decrying the government's decision to remove funding for the cultural and background reports used in sentencing. The government has confirmed it will scrap legal aid for Section 27 reports, saying they had led to a cottage industry that has cost taxpayers millions of dollars and shortened sentences. Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith says 2,500 reports were prepared last year at a cost of $7.5 million, but there was no evidence to suggest they had saved the government money by avoiding prison sentences or stopping people committing further crimes. And then the story goes on to find a former district court judge, David Harvey, who says they were useful, these reports, and a criminologist and a guy who was milking the system, riding the gravy train, a guy called Dwan Juan Tauri, who said lawyers would still get reports written by some clients, those who can afford them, which will not be working class or poor Māori, Pākehā or Pacifica, etc. So, some criticism from inverted commas experts. And this announcement was tied in with the abandonment of the philosophy, principle of the last government that they were trying to reduce prison populations by 30%. That's not reducing crime by 30%, reducing prison populations by 30%. So what's going on here? Is this just fulfilling a promise? Are the experts right or not? Joining us now is the Justice Minister, Paul Goldsmith. Minister, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Sean. It's great to be here. Top of the morning to you.
All right. The critics. Some are coming out saying this is discriminatory, of course, against Māori, because everything is, and poor people, and even a former district court judge, David Harvey, saying these were useful, these reports. Are the experts all wrong?
Well, look, people always talk about that. The reality is that for Māori, of course, are more likely to be victims of crime, and so they've got every interest, like all New Zealanders, ensuring that there are real consequences for crime and that the justice system works well and efficiently. And so what we had here was, it's important for people to understand, the whole legal aid process of people defending themselves in court. We haven't changed that. Every time someone goes to sentencing, there are a whole lot of factors that the judge considers. We haven't changed that. And we haven't done away with the Section 27 reports. People can come in verbally and say, this is this person's background, and explain it to a judge. All we're doing is stopping what turned into a vigorous little industry of people writing these reports, these little mini essays on the history of New Zealand, and sending them in and charging $3,000 or $4,000 each. And it had ballooned from something that cost us nothing 6 or 7 years ago through to $7.5 million a year, which is quite a lot in terms of the justice budget. You can do a lot for $7.5 million, and so we've knocked it on the head.
All right, so a cost-cutting measure primarily?
Yes, partly because I've got no doubt that if I hadn't been jumping up and down about this last year in the media, it would have just kept on rising. It literally went from 40,000, virtually nothing in 2017. Every year it just stepped up and up and up to $7.5 million. It would have been 10 million before long, and even more. And so, yes, that there are limited funds for legal aid. We're in a tough environment, so we don't want to be wasting it. So yes, it's partly that, but it's also partly about some of the providers of these reports were advertising. Get one of our reports, and you might get 25% off your.
Was there any analysis done as to the outcomes for people who had cultural background reports? Were they a way to discount your sentence?
Well, they were certainly used for discounts. Cultural reports were used for discounts, and we've got broader concerns around that. And the way we're going to deal with that ultimately is by limiting the total amount of discounts that a judge can provide to 40%, and that's another step that will require changes to the Sentencing Act. I mean, obviously, judges do need to have some flexibility to take into account circumstances, but what we've seen over recent years is there's been developed these massive discounts. So people who have been convicted of serious violent crimes or serious sexual crimes, some of them have ended up in home detention. We fundamentally don't think that's appropriate.
All right. And people can still present a Section 27 report. They just have to pay for it themselves.
Well, yes, you could. I'd be surprised if too many did. But the original purpose, and it's been around for 20 years, the original purpose was just an oral report. Somebody, a friend or an acquaintance, or somebody who knew the person who was the defendant, to come in and speak on their behalf or send a note in. And so anybody can do that. There's nothing stopping people doing that. It's just the funding of these little mini theses that had been developed. And to be honest, even the previous Minister of Justice, Kerry Ellen, didn't really defend them. She realised it was a problem. It had grown too big and was turning into a little industry.
Right, so she won't be able to present a report that the taxpayer pays for when you know...
Well, I don't know the details of that.
All right. Okay. Look, coinciding with this, Minister, is an announcement, and I'm really trying to get to the guts if this has any practical change, that this government has abandoned the previous government's goal of reducing the prison muster by 30%. What, in effect, does that policy change mean or change?
Well, it's a very important in terms of signalling the priorities of a government. So, I think having targets across the government sector, the whole government itself, is very important for focusing the minds of the whole justice sector. And amazingly, the only clearly articulated target in the whole justice sector in the previous government was this reduction of the prison population by 30%, irrespective of what's going on in our communities in terms of violent crime.
Well, surely the way to do that would be to reduce crime by 30%.
Well, precisely. I mean, yes, we'd love to see a 30% reduction in the prison population if there had been a 30% reduction in violent crime. But the reality was that over the same 6 years that the prison population was falling, violent crime was rising by about 40%. Retail crimes going up by 90 or 80%. So that was the problem. And so we're dropping. That's not our target. Our target is to reduce people's victimisations levels for violent crime, dealing with that small group of serious youth offenders. And our third target will be on focusing on speeding up the processes of the courts so that people don't have to wait years for justice.
Believe me, the platform is an organisation that knows all about that. We're almost a year after a full hearing before the Employment Relations Authority. They said they'd have a decision for us in 3 months. Haven't heard cooey from them. That's an aside.
Yeah, but that's the nuts and bolts of the justice system that needs the attention, and it hasn't had sufficient attention. And so, for me as Justice Minister, that is one of my 3 core targets: speeding up the process of the courts. And there's 20 things that need to be done across police, corrections, justice, the whole sector, and we've got to work on it consistently. It's hard, it's complicated, but that's the sort of thing you've got to focus on to make a real difference.